Hello, and thank you for joining us for our third and final session of the Childhood Trauma Series. I'm Hope Newport, Family Services Manager at the International FOP Association. And I am excited for today's topic, which I think is a really important one and one that we often overlook. We focus on, our loved one or our child with FOP so many times, but um, your well-being as a caregiver has a direct impact on the person as well. So I'm excited for today's presentation, and I'm going to hand it over to our speaker for today. So Susan Dannon, who you've met in our last two sessions, is back to share her wisdom from over 25 years of experience as a social worker and a therapist, and as a course instructor at Mindspring Health. She is here and working with the FOP community to help provide this insight for our families. So thank you so much, Susan, for being here today, and I will hand it over to you.
All right, thank you very much. So as was mentioned, this presentation is being brought by IFOPA and Mindspring Mental Health Alliance. So just want to say special thanks to them for partnering with Mindspring to provide this service. So session overview for today, we'll do a little bit review again on childhood trauma, just for anyone who hasn't seen the first two webinars. And then we'll talk more specifically about secondary traumatic stress. So looking at how trauma impacts caregivers, families, and then also siblings. And then we'll wrap that up with talking a little bit about self-care and things that you can do for yourself during times of that higher stress. So childhood trauma. So we've mentioned this before, but just good to have that reminder of what we're talking about when we are talking about trauma. So trauma is an experience that triggers an intense physical and emotional stress reaction exceeding the person's ability to cope and challenging their reality, causing a perceived loss of control. And we've talked about before that loss of control is really the most important aspect in trauma. It is how much we perceive we have lost control. And losing control is about the fact that we recognize that we don't have the coping skills in order to deal with what is occurring. So it is looking at, how much has that impacted us? How much are we perceiving that we have some control over the situation? And we'll be tying that into a lot of the secondary traumatic stress, because how much control you feel that you have over the situation has a huge impact on how we are able to personally cope with the trauma. And then that also directly impacts how we help our children cope as well. So we're going to focus a lot, especially on medical trauma. So medical trauma is the psychological and physical reactions of child and or their family. So looking at the caregivers and the siblings is going to be our main focus today and how that impacts you. So medical trauma is about the pain, injury, medical procedures, treatments that may be invasive or frightening to the individual, and then how that kind of impacts you as caregivers and also the children's siblings. So we looked at this stat in the first webinar that we did, and I felt it was good to go back and look at this again. So we're talking about with medical trauma, up to 80% of children and their families experience some traumatic stress reactions following a life-threatening illness, injury, or painful medical procedure. So the other piece of that we didn't focus on as much last time is that second stat of the fact that 20 to 30% of parents and 15 to 25% of children and their siblings experience persistent reactions after those events with a medical trauma. So Medical trauma is very real, and I think that's one of the reasons that we're also talking about this, as I don't think that medical trauma oftentimes gets enough um, attention or understanding. And so, again, when we're talking about trauma, we're also talking about, those cumulative traumas over time with FOP. We're also talking about helping kids manage the smaller traumas. So as the bigger traumas come, that they have the skills to be able to cope with that. And that's kind of the same with the secondary traumatic stress, is the more that you are able to find ways to cope and feel in control of what is happening, the less that it's going to impact you over time. So looking at that from that perspective as secondary traumatic stress, and what exactly is that? So secondary traumatic stress is the natural consequences of behaviors and emotions from knowing about trauma experienced by another, and the stress resulting from helping or wanting to help the suffering person. So that last part is really important, I think, in situations with medical trauma and specifically FOP, is that in a lot of circumstances, you want to help your child and you're not necessarily able to. And that's where that perceived loss of control often comes in, is that there are things that you cannot control in medical trauma. You are really kind of relying on medical professionals to step in and take care of those things. And you want to be able to be there. You want to be able to help your child. You want to be able to take away the pain when they have a flare up. And you can't always do that. And so that's kind of where that secondary traumatic stress comes from, especially for parents. We deeply, as parents and caregivers, want to protect our kids and keep them from harm. And when we can't and we have to watch that, that is where that stress comes from with the secondary traumatic stress. And then talking a little bit more specifically about FOP, there are also aspects of, self-blame. You know, if a child falls, if you end up making a decision about them having some type of injection or procedure and that makes things worse, that is also something that can feel very out of control. Did I not do enough to prevent a flare up? And then also, the other thing is the fact that FOP is chronic in nature. So you can't take a break with it. You're always on guard. And that also can really increase that stress level as well. Um, and so all the emotions that we have about that can really be, in a sense, our biggest enemy sometimes, is being able to take things one day at a time, not be so hard on ourselves, know that there are some things that are going to be out of our control and that we have to, in a sense, become comfortable with some of that. So secondary traumatic stress is the emotional distress that comes from dealing with the impact of your child's trauma firsthand. So it was just kind of what I was talking about with watching, your child go through these things and the impact that has on you, especially when you feel that loss of control. And the signs and symptoms of secondary traumatic stress are very similar to post-traumatic stress disorder. So it's a lot of those same things of that feeling depersonalized, having, stress reactions when people are talking about certain things, wanting to avoid certain situations. So all of that is a piece of that secondary traumatic stress. The other thing to know is that parents who have their own history of trauma can be more vulnerable to secondary traumatic stress. So if you have had a history of trauma yourself, I often will tell parents that there is nothing like having a child to bring up your own childhood traumas. So those reflections of when a child is the same age you were going through a trauma or goes through a similar experience, that is going to bring those feelings up and feel like you are kind of experiencing those things firsthand. So with that, kind of looking at, family and sibling secondary traumatic stress, these are some things, that are kind of more specific to children with chronic medical diseases and also children with FOP. So there is a sense that everyone may feel a need to protect the child with FOP, and that's where some of that guilt can come in is, what do we need to do to order to protect them as much as we can from being injured, from being hurt. And so that is one of the stressors that will contribute to that secondary traumatic stress. We talked a bit about this yesterday, and I felt it was good to revisit it, is then you also have that sibling survivor's guilt. So survivor's guilt has this sense of that I don't have the right to feel upset or have my own feelings or my own distress because my sibling has a painful and chronic disease. So I need to push all my stuff down to not be a burden to anyone else in the family. And there's definitely adults that have worked with over time who have felt that way when they have had a sibling as a child and feeling like they had to like be the good kid. They had to push their emotions down so that their parents didn't have one more burden. Um, and so for those kids, that survivor's guilt can be an aspect of that secondary traumatic stress. Family sense of helplessness with flare-ups. You can't necessarily control the flare-ups. There may be times that you have an idea of when a flare-up may be occurring, and flare-ups can also come out of nowhere. Um, I have worked with a lot of families who have kids with chronic medical issues. I used to work in a hospital setting. And especially like during the pandemic, I had a lot of kids that I was seeing who they and their families were struggling because they had, compromised immune systems. And so, when you're dealing with a child who will have flare ups when they are sick or injured and not knowing what to expect or how long it's going to be or how painful this is going to be, again, that's that loss of control. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know how it's going to be this time. Um, then you also have this impact for siblings where they will often take on extra duties in order to help, which, on the outside looks like a positive thing. But for some of the siblings, this can become an aspect of that needing to be good enough for the parents. And it can also be kind of an internalized piece of them wanting to have something that they can control. And so that's where they can then end up becoming very agitated or irritated when they lose control of those things or if they don't feel like they are able to do something good enough. And so they can also become kind of that parentified adult. So, they take on adult type of aspects rather than allowing themselves to be a child. And then also, one of the things with siblings when they have, a family member who has a chronic medical illness, they will often worry about their siblings when they're away from home. And so that can cause like some separation anxiety and worry about what is happening to them. And so that can also increase their stress as well. So, kind of the step up from that is there can be a point where you get to what we refer to as parental burnout. So, parental burnout is the physical, mental, and emotional exhaustion that one feels from the chronic stress of parenting. So, at its deepest level, if secondary traumatic stress is not dealt with, you can get to this stage of burnout where you feel completely depleted physically, emotionally, spiritually. And so that's some of what we're wanting to avoid is, yes, this is going to be something that is stressful, and there are things that we can also do about it. So getting to that level of burnout, some of the things that you'll see are feeling exhausted and drained all the time. Feelings of helplessness and hopelessness become the norm. Normally, there's also a lot of self doubt, doubting yourself. Am I making the right decision? Am I doing the right thing? Maybe I should have, would have, could have. And then having aches, pains, and other illnesses yourself, whenever we are stressed over a long period of time, that takes a toll on us physically. And so that can come out in other ways. I also teach yoga, and that's one of the things that we'll talk about in yoga is that if we don't listen to our body when it is whispering to us, we will have to listen when it's screaming at us. So those are some of the physical signs that we want to pay attention to and try to catch early. If you're having a loss of motivation, you're having a hard time getting going with things, sustaining energy levels, significant changes in sleep or appetite. So eating more or less than usual, sleeping more or less than usual, having interrupted sleep where you don't feel rested, or sleeping for long periods of time and still not feeling rested. Feeling alone and or disconnected. So, feeling like you don't have anyone who understands you, anyone that you connect to, that you don't have any support system. There may also be increased irritability and anger. And I know in working with parents, that's one thing that they often have guilt and shame about if they are struggling personally is that they get irritable, they get angry with their kids, and then they feel really badly about that. So that can also be a symptom as well. And then isolating and avoiding others. When you get to the point of burnout, you start isolating, you don't want to be in contact with other people. And that is what can kind of contribute to that feeling of loneliness as well. So another aspect of, secondary traumatic stress is what we refer to as vicarious trauma. And sometimes vicarious trauma and secondary traumatic stress will be interchanged. There is a slight difference with vicarious trauma is it's really more about the fact that we feel like this is happening with our child. And so we are feeling along with them. So vicarious trauma is when we open our hearts to hear or bear someone's story and our cherished beliefs are challenged and we feel changed by that. I think the thing with that, with having a child with a chronic condition, is that, when we have our kids, we have certain things that we expect. We have ideas of what it's going to be like being a parent. We have thoughts about what we're going to do with our children and where they're going to go with their lives. And that can be part of that loss of control. It's grieving some of those ambiguous losses that we have when things end up not being the way that we have expected them to be. And so our belief systems, our beliefs about the world change and are challenged by trauma. And that doesn't always necessarily have to be a bad thing. Part of being human is finding ways to be resilient when those things are challenging. And how do we end up finding a path that is going to be a positive one for us? So we're going to look at now what we refer to as compassion satisfaction and compassion fatigue. So compassion satisfaction is the pleasure we receive from caring for others. So when we're talking about secondary traumatic stress, this is actually something that we often talk about in the mental health field. Because whenever you are dealing with anyone on a human level, when you are bearing witness to someone else's pain, Yes, there is going to be times that that is draining. It's going to be times that it's difficult, but there are also things that we gain through that. So we also get pleasure from caring for others, for nurturing others. And so we want to make sure that our compassion satisfaction and our compassion fatigue are in balance. So are we receiving enough joy and pleasure and satisfaction in, doing the things that we need to do for others as compared to how we feel drained by it? So that's where the compassion fatigue comes in. So compassion fatigue is the emotional distress or apathy due to the constant demands of caring for other people. So common themes relate to the depletion of our physical, psychological, social, and even spiritual resources. And normally with compassion fatigue, those symptoms are present across multiple systems. So a lot of what we're going to be talking about now, as far as, how do we address this, are things that actually we do for ourselves in the mental health field as well. Um, it, compassion fatigue is not uncommon. It's something that pretty much all of us struggle with if we are in some type of caregiver role. So the first thing that we want to look at is being able to check in with your body. So as I just mentioned a few moments ago, it's that piece of listening to our body when it is whispering to us. So that we don't have to go through the pain and the difficulty of when our body is kind of screaming at us and telling us that something is wrong. So the things that we want to look at in our body is if you're starting to have increased headaches, and that includes any other type of muscle tension or pain. And oftentimes, if you pay attention to those things, you can start noticing if there are certain patterns to it. So for me personally, whenever I feel stress, I typically feel it in my shoulders and my low neck, and also my low back. A lot of people talk about feeling a lot of their emotional pain in their hips, especially women. Women tend to carry emotional pain in their hips and low back, but it can be almost any place in your body. I will have people talk about that they notice when they are stressed that, if they've ever had like some type of injury in their body, that tends to flare up when they're stressed. So it's just about kind of noticing where you are feeling that in your body. If you notice that you're starting to have increased colds or illnesses, this is something that I kind of have learned to look for over the years. I used to manage a couple of larger teams that I supervised. And if I started noticing that certain people were calling out a lot more because they were sick or not feeling well, oftentimes I would go to them and have a discussion. And it wasn't just about, you've been calling out sick a lot. It was, I'm concerned that you're calling out sick so much. And I want to look at, are you feeling stressed about something? Is the workload getting to you? Because sometimes this isn't just about, the physical health, it's also about how our mental health is tied to our physical health. Having increased sleep problems, so again, that difficulty sleeping, waking up in the middle of the night, not feeling rested. We talked about this a little bit in the first session, as far as, the fact that our body system, when it is calm, is our system where we rest and we digest. So our digestive system is at its best and healthy when we are getting the proper amount of rest and having, reduced stress levels. So when our stress levels increase, our digestive system stops working properly. And so if you're having those high levels of stress, you're going to notice an increase in stomach pain and digestive issues. So that can be another thing that you're looking for. Also, there may be more overeating. So especially overeating comfort foods. And comfort foods can be different for different people. For me personally, I'm a carb person. So if I feel stressed, I will notice that I'm starting to eat more carbs. So breads, pastas, those type of things. Other people, it's sweets. Um, so being able to kind of notice if there are certain patterns to your eating that are going to tell you that you're under stress. And with all of this, it's about noticing when our body is telling us that there is something wrong. And so being able to take time to stop and really listen to our body and seeing what our body is saying to us. So actually, we're going to take a moment just to do a little practice on that to kind of give you an idea of what that's like. So what I want you to do for just a moment is just to take this moment to close your eyes and to just notice your breathing. Notice where you feel your breath. So do you feel it more in your chest, your belly, rib cage, and just noticing how that breath is feeling coming in and out of your body? And then take a moment to notice if you're feeling any tension in your body. So especially pay attention to your jaw, your neck, your shoulders, your low back, your hips. Are there things that you're noticing in your body that you can recognize as feeling tense? And then in yoga, we'll often talk about trying to breathe into those areas where we feel tension. So you inhale into that area, kind of imagining that area. And then as you exhale, trying to release that and let it go. So just continue to kind of practice that over time. And if you still have your eyes closed, you can open them at this point. Um, but the thing is just that simple little exercise of taking a few moments out of your day to notice where your breath is, because typically, we talked about that before. Breathing from our chest is usually our automatic nervous system. It's our stress nervous system. When we're breathing from the belly, that usually means that we are more relaxed. It's more conscious breath. So sometimes if we're feeling ourselves breathing from the chest, or breathing too quickly from the chest, we want to, take that moment to consciously move that breath into the belly to help to kind of soothe and bring that stress level back down. So the other thing to remember about managing stress is that the best protection against stress is the individual's confidence in their ability to experience discomfort and still persist. So this kind of goes back to that idea of, actual loss of control as compared to our perceived loss of control. So the more that we are able to do these things, practice these ways of managing stress, the more confident we feel that we are able to manage it. And if we believe that we can manage stress, then we're going to be able to understand that we can have some control over that discomfort and that we are going to be able to handle it and find joy even in the difficult moments. So the more that we believe that is true, the more that we are going to feel capable of managing our stress in a positive way. So along with managing our personal stress, we also want to look at managing the family stress. So I think one thing that's really important when you're talking about any type of chronic medical condition with the family is to acknowledge the suffering. Sometimes we want to push the suffering down, pretend that it's not there, because it's painful to deal with. And so I really talk to people about the fact that we do want to sit with those losses. We do want to sit with the suffering because we have to allow ourselves to feel in order to change. So the idea with suffering is that if we allow ourselves to sit with it and acknowledge it, then we can also find a way to transform it. So, transforming suffering is the fact that when we are able to suffer well, the suffering becomes transformed into compassion. And that is compassion for ourselves and also compassion for others. So, the more that we understand our own suffering, the more that we understand the suffering that is going on for the rest of the family, the more that we can turn that into compassion for ourselves and compassion for the others in our family. And so when we have compassion for each other, then we are going to be more tolerant, we're going to be more understanding, we're going to be more supportive. We want to educate and keep communication open so everyone knows what is happening and don't have to fill in the blanks. So we talked about that last time with helping children move through trauma, is that kids need to understand what is happening on their level, or they will start creating stories about what's happening. And a lot of times those stories are more severe than what the actual truth is. So finding a way to communicate that at the child's level becomes very important so that everyone knows what is happening, that they don't feel left out, and that they're not making up stories because they don't have enough information. Let the siblings be seen and heard. So make sure that you carve out time for the siblings away from the disease. That the siblings have that time and that space for themselves where they are not focused on the disease and what's happening with the disease in the family. And that's something that's very important, is that they are able to have a break from that. And that they know that it's okay to have a break from that doesn't have to be their focus, that they don't have to be that little adult who is trying to take care of everything, that they're allowed to be a child themselves. How we can support the family members with FOP to live life to the fullest. So as a family, being able to give hope and a sense of control for everyone in the family. So that can be looking at mapping out what life is going to be like, even if it's kind of in a hypothetical type of way. How can we allow, the child with FOP to have a life that is full and has meaning and allows them to participate fully in the family? And the more that you're able to do that, the more you feel that sense of purpose, the more that you feel in control as a family, and the less helpless you feel. So this is all about the fact that when we're able to do that, we feel empowered. So, that's my part as kind of a therapist when we're talking about secondary traumatic stress, is when a client comes in to see me and they're struggling and they're in a dark place, I'm looking for the hope. I'm looking at where are we going to go? How are we going to work on this? What the future is going to look like for them. And that's part of my job at the beginning, is talking about, okay, these are the things we are going to work on and giving them some hope for the future. Hope is really one of the things that we hang our hat on when we're talking about feeling like a sense of control, that I do have some capacity to help. So if you go back and kind of look at what we talked about previously, as far as trauma being a loss of control, having hope, having purpose, having direction helps to start give us a sense of control again. It also is about that secondary traumatic stress piece of feeling helpless, that I see my child suffering and I don't feel like I can do anything about it. So if I can find those things that I do have control over, the things that I can have hope about, that I can have a plan for the future, that is also going to help you feel less helpless. That there are things you can do, that there is much more under your control than sometimes you may believe. And then the last part is to look for the helpers. So who is the support system for you and your family? It may also be getting children involved in sibling support groups. Um, and I know of several sibling support groups for children who have siblings with chronic medical conditions. Uh, so it's really important for them to have those people who understand what they are going through. And it's good for you to also have people that understand what you're going through. And so that piece of looking for the helpers, who are the people that can help me? Who are the people that support me? Who are the people that are on my team? So along with all of that, when we talk about sitting with feelings, we also have to sit with our own feelings. So we need to allow ourselves to feel. A lot of times, there is this sense of trying to bottle things up that, I don't want to look upset or hurt or stressed because I don't want my child to feel badly that I am struggling and that I am having stress. Or I need to look brave and strong. I don't want to people to think that my child is a burden in some way. And so we stuff it all down. And the problem with bottling all those things up is that they build up over time and they interfere with our ability to manage stress. So it's really important for us to be able to name our stress, to own it, to sit with it, because until you have a name for the problem, you can't change it. So by naming it, we can change it. So if I can say, yes, I'm feeling stressed about this. Yes, I am feeling overwhelmed. Yes, sometimes I feel that this isn't fair. Yes, I feel like it's too much sometimes, and that is okay. And then once I am able to acknowledge it, to name it, then I can go, okay, I know that I'm feeling this way. Now, what am I going to do about it? It's hard to heal something if you don't know what you're healing. So name it and then change it. And then the other thing is to find ways to protect yourself from stress. So these are the three things that we're going to look at as far as protective factors. So we're going to look at self-monitoring. So self-monitoring is being aware of what you need. Self-care is the ability to find meaning and purpose in your own life. And education is about knowing what to expect and how to cope. Because again, knowing what to expect, knowing that you have the ability to cope is going to give you a sense of control, is going to normalize your experience, is going to help you move forward. So what does self-monitoring look like? Self-monitoring is kind of what we just did a moment ago. It's about paying attention to your breathing. What do I notice about my breath? Am I breathing slowly or quickly? Am I feeling lightheaded? Am I breathing rapidly? Where is my breath at? So just stopping and noticing those things. Noticing your posture, checking in for that muscle tension like we just did. So am I hunched over? That's usually more of a protective factor, or am I more open? So what am I feeling, and what do those areas of tension usually tell me? And through that, we're going to deliberately observe those things so that we know what our signs and our symptoms are, so that we can more quickly find a way to cope with that. And a part of that is kind of knowing what our emotional thermometer is. So one of the activities or exercises I often do with kids, teens, and adults is creating kind of an emotional thermometer. So writing down your signs and symptoms associated with different levels of stress. So when the level is green, is calm, what does that look like for me in my body? When I'm moving into yellow, I'm feeling agitated. What does that look like? What does it sound like? What does it feel like? When I'm at an orange level, that's kind of the tipping point. What does that look like, feel like, sound like? And then red when I get to that meltdown. Again, what does that look like? What does that feel like in my body? What does that sound like? And so by being able to identify your stress temperature at any given moment, then you're going to be able to be more in control. Also to be able to notice, I'm moving into kind of yellow or I'm moving into orange. What is it then that I need to bring that temperature back down again? So noticing it in the moment and then being able to do things to calm your system. Make use of technology. So one of the things that I often talk to teens and adults with is we have our smartphones. There are a lot of ways that we can use them in a positive way. So if you know that stress tends to cause you to like skip your morning run or forget to, have a moment to yourself to meditate, set a timer that will remind you to do those things. Monitor your steps, know how much exercise you're getting. There are also apps that you can download that, can keep track of some of those things. So use the technology you have to help you monitor those things, to help give you reminders. And then the last thing with self-monitoring is knowing your triggers. If you know certain things stress you, trying to minimize those as much as possible. So, if you know that bright lights is something that stresses you, then, making sure that you have a calming environment. That's actually something I do in my office. If you can kind of notice behind me, there are blue, uh, what looks like probably on the screen, piece of paper on my ceiling. Those are actually covering the fluorescent lights. Fluorescent lighting tends to trigger a lot of people physically and emotionally. So I have light covers that filter out the fluorescent lights because fluorescent lights can be really harsh. So it's doing sometimes those just little things that are going to help us to notice the things that trigger us so that we can avoid them or put something in place to help reduce that trigger. And that's really kind of what self monitoring is all about. It's about empowering you. It's about helping you know what your triggers are so you can avoid them or remove them. And then you can take soothing actions. So sometimes you can't avoid or remove the trigger. And if you know that that is something that triggers you, how are you going to manage that? What are the soothing actions that you can take? And you can also know that in those times that you may need to take a break. So how do I take either a mental break or walk away from the situation for a few moments, carve out time for myself? Because the more that you take care of yourself, the less likely you are to take out your stress on other people. So the more that we manage our stress, the less that that is going to affect our children and others. So self-care, a lot of times, when people think of self-care, they will think about, bubble baths and massages and those type of things. And those are self-care, definitely. And self-care really is so much more than that. Because self-care is really about finding things that give you a sense of meaning and purpose. That this life is worth living for these reasons. And so self care is really about finding those things that give you joy, that give you pleasure, that make life worth living. So self care can be implemented into your daily life in small pieces. It doesn't have to be big things. It's finding a few things that nourish your body and your soul and putting them in practice on a daily basis that can make just really a world of difference. So I have like little morning rituals and little evening rituals that I do. So one of the first things I do in the morning is that I have a cup of warm lemon water. Um, and I normally will try to at least take like a 5 minute walk before I get to work. Sometimes more, sometimes less. But it is, again, just those little things that we put into place that give us that sense of peace and joy. And so, the thing with that is by implementing those little things throughout the day, a lot of times, sometimes we can actually get overwhelmed with thinking about adding self care on our to do list. And so it actually can end up being counterproductive if we think, oh gosh, now I have to do self care and that's one more thing that I have to do. So find those little things that you can do on a daily basis and make that consistent. And then if you are feeling just really overwhelmed in the moment, this is a 5 step process to help get you back on track. So this 5 step process was developed by Kathy Flaminio, who is a friend and colleague of mine who specializes in emotional regulation. And so this is her 5 step process. And the first step is if you are starting to feel overwhelmed, anxious, overburdened, is the first thing you need to do is stop. And she talks about the fact of stopping means we are stopping emotionally, physically, in this moment, just stop yourself. And then the second one is to stretch. So in yoga, we talk about, stretching in the spine in 6 directions. So the 6 directions are stretching side, side, stretching up, stretching down, and then twisting one side and the other side. So that is, the stretching the spine in 6 directions. Because stretching our spine is both energizing and relaxing. It is, in a way, massaging that vagus nerve, the nerve that is responsible for our fight and flight response and also our calm response. So by stretching, it gets that back online. And then shaking. So shaking hands, shaking arms, it can be shaking the entire body. Shaking is our natural release. Um, so if you've ever seen like an animal that's been injured and after the injury their body just starts shaking, that's what our body is supposed to do. Unfortunately, a lot of times, we'll say things like if we see someone shaking after like something traumatic, we'll be like, oh, it's okay, just calm down, you don't need to shake. And the thing is, actually, we do need to shake. Shaking is the body's natural way to release that tension. So purposely shaking the body is a way of releasing that. And then sighing. So taking a deep breath, sighing, that is a breath of release. So sighing is more like taking a deep breath in and then breathing out. So it is a releasing breath. So we're taking all of that energy, that heat that's in our body from feeling stress, and we are physically, mentally, emotionally releasing it from the body. Another way to do the sigh breath that I'll teach people is to inhale and bring your shoulders up to your ears. So it's this, and letting those shoulders drop like that, it's like a physical and emotional release, just letting, in a sense, things come off of your shoulder. And then the last one is then to smile. Um, Smiling is kind of like a fake it till you make it type of thing. What we have found in research is that when you smile, it actually starts a process of releasing feel good hormones into your body. And so, even if you don't feel like smiling, just that actual act of smiling, even if you don't feel like it, can start to reset your system. So stop, stretch, shake, sigh, smile. That is the simple, quick 5 step process to get you back online. And then engage in healthy habits. So get outside. I talked a little bit about that yesterday with the kids. It's also important for you as well. Um, so taking that mindful walk. So again, mindful walking is about going out and noticing things around you. It's oftentimes silent walking. So looking for the things that you hear, the things that you see, feeling the sun on your skin, feeling the wind, noticing the things that you smell, the things that you hear around you, so that you're focusing on something in your mind that is going to help to relax and release. I just mentioned yoga. Yoga is a really good way to release tension from the body because it is a lot of stretching of both physically and emotionally. And even just 10, 20 minutes they found can be helpful. Drink a lot of water. Water is nourishing. Water flushes out a lot of the toxins that build up in our body. It keeps us hydrated. So we have found that actually water makes a huge impact on your mood. So make sure that you're drinking enough water. Create art, dance, sing. There are a lot of studies on using the creative arts, dancing, singing, that have shown that those activities do significantly reduce your stress level. And what's really interesting in a lot of the studies, especially with art and dance and singing, is you do not have to be good at those things for them to reduce your stress. It's just the actual art of doing it that is important. So the other piece with the self-care is these type of activities, the breathing to calm the nervous system. So we talked about that, moving the breath into the belly or doing those releasing breaths. Meditation. So meditation are techniques that bring awareness. So meditation is focusing on a certain idea. Um, they can also be meditations that you listen to. There's lots of apps nowadays that will have like guided meditation. So meditation can also be about, creating something in your mind where you're going to some place that is calming, that is relaxing. And we found that if you can hold a thought in your mind of a calming and relaxing place, it actually reduces your stress level physically. Mindfulness is about noticing the present moment. So that is what I was talking about with the mindful walk. I'm noticing what is happening in this moment around me. I am noticing, what is going on internally and externally around me right now. And then spirituality gives life context. So spirituality is about finding a faith, a community group that you feel safe to share in. It can be anything, and not just, religiously, but also on a spiritual level. It can be art, it can be music, it can be being out in nature, just being able to connect to something that feels larger than yourself so that you're not feeling like you're trying to hold this all together by yourself. Um, Laughter has physical and mental health benefits. The more that we laugh, the more positive we feel. So, there's the old phrase about laugh and the world laughs with you. Laughter is contagious. There is actually laughter yoga, because laughing improves your immune system. It relieves pain. So pain is reduced when you're laughing. It gives you, personal satisfaction. So put humor on your horizon. Actually pay attention to it. Find situations that you find funny. Uh, Even simple things, having things around like photos, comic strips, things that give you a chuckle, and then sharing that laughter with others. So again, that's kind of that fake it till you make it piece too, is, that smile, that laughter, even if it feels forced at first, starts to feel natural and it starts to feel good. Make sure that you are having positive connections. So make sure that you're making time to spend with supportive friends. And the really important piece with this, it'll allow others to support you. I think that's one thing that I hear from my adult clients a lot is I don't want to be a burden to anyone else. I don't want to put this onto other people. I actually have two close friends who have children with rare diseases. And I've often will hear them talking about this as well is, I have this that I am dealing with my child, and I don't want anyone else to feel like I'm burdening them with this. And the thing is, when you look at that, if it was anyone else, you would be doing the same thing for them. So give yourself the same grace that you would give other people. Ask for help. Ask for the things you need. And at the same time, also set boundaries. It's okay to set aside time for your own self care. It's okay to say no to certain things. Don't worry about hurting other people's feelings. Those people that care about you, who are close to you, are going to understand. So we just kind of talked about this a little bit a minute ago with the meditation. So guided imagery is a type of meditation. It can be self-guided, or it can be listening to someone having a script that you're going through. I will keep like calming photos or things that remind me of calming places in my office. So, it's about, closing your eyes, putting your feet on the floor, imagining yourself at a beach, the ocean, the sun shining, the sound of the waves. It's all about creating that time and moment where you can physically, emotionally feel that. So whatever is a calming place for you. So we talked about that a little bit in the second session for kids. Same for you guys, is create that safe place in your mind that you can go to whenever you need that break. So this is just kind of a summary of the resilience top 10 list. Recognize signs of fatigue so that you can address them quickly. Cultivate spirituality, cultivate those things that bring you meaning and purpose, that allow you to feel like it's not just on your shoulders. Maintain curiosity. Education, we found, is one of the best protectors against stress. The more you know, the more you understand. That's why I think like these webinar topics and those type of things are so important. The more you know, the more you're able to address things, the more that you feel in control of things. Stay connected to yourself and to others. Say it out loud. There's no shame. Name it so that you can deal with it. Be grateful for the little things. Find the joy in the moments. Celebrate successes. Celebrate the little things. Celebrate when a flare up finally ends. Celebrate when you have a day that goes well. Just those little things. Maintain your sense of humor. Find things that are funny, that are amusing to you. Focus on the big picture. A lot of times we can get stuck in the day-to-day stuff, and we need to kind of look at what is on the horizon. So again, finding that sense of hope and ways that we can move forward. Set an intention for self-care physically, mentally, and spiritually. So make time and make space to find meaning and purpose. So you'll be getting the resources. So these are some of the resources with IFOPA. There will also be these recommended readings. So some of them are kind of from what we've been talking about. Some of them are some extra ones that you could also look into. This is the contact information for MindSpring. We do have a lot of other children's mental health and adult mental health topics that you can join into free of charge. So again, thank you to IFOPA and MindSpring Mental Health Alliance for sponsoring these webinars. And I will turn it back over to you now.
Thank you again, Susan, so much for bringing us through the full circle of this three-part series.